Greetings folks, oh my god, I love this build. I didn't have this much fun in Tainted Grail until I thought, oh my god, wait, there are those two cool swords that slash the hair with magic. It feels a bit sluggish at the start, but it's really an amazing farmer. All heavy attacks will project a wave of energy that will eat anything in a straight line. Kinda like Scorching Pathway, if you know that spell. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and maybe subscribe for more RPG gaming content. This build will fully come online in Act 2, and if you hate the leveling in Act 1, my skill tree will be compatible to a duelist or mage startup. Because after all, our main stats are gonna be strength and then spirituality. And well, of course, a lot of perception because I refuse to make any build without a lot of critical damage. In this video, I will go through all the attributes, the perk, and where to get the gear, more importantly. There is also gonna be a leveling section for the first 2 acts. And before I begin, for the location of extra items, where to start quest, get spells, and anything else in game, use Map Genie. You can find the link in the description down below. It's amazing. Okay, I need to explain how this build works because this build can only work with 2 items. Tidepiercer, which you can get in Act 1. If you want to know the location, watch the leveling section. And Sunfire Shortsword, which is found in Act 2 during one of the quests. This build scales based on the damage of this weapon, so we are a dual-wield build. However, we are not a melee build. We still benefit from anything that increases the damage of our weapons. It's essential that in both weapons you have an Azure Lich Stone, because otherwise you will struggle to regain mana. As you saw in the video earlier, anytime I attacked something, my mana went back full immediately. But that's because we regain 30% of the damage that we do. And that is a lot. And then you want a relic that buffs your damage overall. If you're starting the game with Tidepiercer in Act 1, you still want to use Tidepiercer with another weapon because it will change how the slashes perform. It's gonna be wider, it's gonna be better. Let's look at our attributes. This build has a 8 point of strength requirement, 8 point of endurance, 8 point of dexterity. I do not suggest investing in dexterity any more than this. 11 point of spirituality, but only if you're using the crafted gear I'm gonna show you in a moment. 3 points in practicality, also because we are using pieces of the crow set. How do I get the crow set? It's part of the Morrigan quest line. Leveling section will show you where to start that one. And then everything we can in perception. Our critical damage is actually 100 points higher because on this setup, our mana is always gonna be lower than our health. Okay, let's look at the skill tree. Our main tree is one-handed. There is no dual-wield tree in Tainted Grail. One-handed is dual-wield. In fact, Agile Fighter priority. Unending Assault later. We do not benefit this much. However, on tankier targets is still a damage increase. Ambidextrous, yes, because otherwise we consume too much stamina. This one should be taken as early points if you're struggling with stamina, depending on your leveling gear. We use 2 swords, so we cannot benefit, sadly, from adaptive combat. So we will still take the attack speed increase. When you start out, Godly Physique should be taken in any build that is melee, regardless. It affects everything. If you're leveling up, not as a mage, but as a duelist, Godly Physique should be your first points. Then we take Weapons of Great Heft, because even though our weapons are not super heavy, we still benefit somewhat. Okay, let's look at Endurance. Moral Health. These should be taken, I think, in Act 2. You don't really need these early. Nothing else in Endurance. Dexterity. The most important points in Dexterity are 1 point here and Marksman, because Marksman will buff our damage a lot because this is a ranged build. Even though you could use the heavy attack in melee, it's safer to go Marksman in most fights because we are really not that tanky. So if you're leveling up as a mage, for example, before you have Tidebreaker, first points go in Marksman. Mana Battery for extra mana. This is especially good when you start out leveling because we don't have a lot of stats, so also priority. Invigorating Energy later, when you have a decent mana pool, not at the start. Extra Lucky. We do not benefit that much from Glacial Cascade because ideally enemy needs to die fast, otherwise we are in trouble. Go for the eyes, absolutely. Respite 1 point. It's still useful, sometimes it will proc. We should not have stamina issues in Act 3. In Act 1 and 2, sometimes, depending on how much time we need to dodge. Critical Ages, super good when our critical strike is high. Bloodthirst is how we sustain ourselves. This is quite important because 4% of the damage you dealt, it's still a lot. So when your critical hit is somewhat high, go Bloodthirst. Okay, practicality. Exploitation of Affliction, if you're using a Blade Ring or you have another way to proc a status effect with the consumable or stuff, it's up to you. Still free damage. It will not, of course, affect your first hit. Armor is not a priority, we are taking that mainly for survivability. Also, when you're early, you still want to put inner strength. If you're leveling up as a duelist, 1 point here and 1 point in inner strength because we put a lot of points in endurance. This one much later. You should not need this one. Best offense when your gear is somewhat decent and you have a couple of upgrades. Sure. Uncanny agility and acrobatic dodge. I'm almost 70. I had leftover points. This build doesn't eat fast enough, for example, to benefit too much from the Red Death 3, which is kind of a shame because this is a lot of damage we are leaving on the table. However, if you have spare points, and I mean when you're above 60, okay, not before, you can go Plague Warden and Red Dead Embrace for extra survivability. Our gloves will trigger because we regain mana after we hit, so the gloves proc earlier. So we have 100 critical damage most of the time, thanks to these gloves. The gloves and the back are both crafted pieces. You can buy the recipe from one of the blacksmith in Ulfur village in this location. If for some reason you don't want to craft or you think it's boring, that's not a big deal. You will probably have to use a duelist cloak because we don't have that many non-crafted back options. On our chest we are using the Percival tunic. Percival can be used fully instead of our pieces of gear. However, I will not use the Percival helm just because Crow is much better. For amulet, you can use Stone Warden Talisman. An alternative could be Amulet of the Novice Ogre Hunter, which will give you a fat 33% damage, but only when you're full health. However, I'm using Stone Warden because on this setup we don't have a lot of crit. For rings, the only mandatory ring that you want to use is Wardman Amulet because that's 25% that we benefit. I use a Blood Ring and in the perk section it's mainly to proc a status. If you do not want to use the Blood Ring, you will have to proc a status in another way. That is up to you. For boots we are using Percival because they're still good. Plus we don't need to invest other stats. If you want to put more points, you could use Lancelot if you want. However, I like my setup personally. I had builds with more upgrades that couldn't deal all this burst damage. You can get Tidepiercer immediately as soon as you get off the shore. There is just a mini boss that you can kill with blood transfusion and a little bit of kiting. Okay, this is my character near the end of Act 1 before the main quest, because usually I do side quest, exploration, grind, so I'm prepared for Act 2. I didn't start to level up with Tidepiercer. I was Blood Transfusion until I had enough stats to equip. And then I paired up with a Cursed Bloodblade. This part is really not that important. You can use another weapon. Ideally, however, it should have low requirement because we are kinda a bit tight with points already. Points that I put, which was pretty much mandatory for the gear that I was using. As you can see, I didn't invest yet in Perception. That one is gonna be boosted a lot in Act 2. So, an amazing set for this build. Has very little requirement, and it's the Worn Druid. That's how I started. The Priestess Cape. I'm still gonna use this for a while because mana regeneration is extremely low and I don't have the relic set up to sustain the cost of heavy attack. For rings, you can use pretty much what you want. Necromancer are really good. If you don't want to use Necromancer, you could Waning Moon for a little extra mana, but I prefer Necromancer on this one. Amulet from one of the bounties. Okay, for perks, consider this is a leveling tree, so there might be some difference where you need to respect compared to the final build. In strength, depending if you're leveling up with magic or physical, your priority is gonna change a little more. If you're playing as melee, Godly Physique instantly, maxed. If you're playing Duelist or before you have the requirement to use your Tidepiercer, Agile Fighter, Ambidextrous, be sure to equip 2 swords because we are not using these. If you want to use these for the extra damage and then you want to respec later, you can do that as well. In practicality, 1 point and 1 point because we're putting a lot of endurance, so we want to have some return. We didn't invest yet in armor, that we will do that in Act 2. Before you use your Tidepiercer, or if you start as magic with Blood Transfusion, just put Arcane Teaching. In Dexterity, as soon as you have Tidepiercer, if you're starting out as magic, it's super worth to start getting this one. And this is pretty much my entire setup for Act 1. I don't suggest crafting in this build at this stage. Later, it's more worth it. However, the crafting level doesn't really matter. Also, since we're talking about Act 1, don't forget to do your Shrine of the Bear for extra physical damage. However, since we are using pieces of the Crow set in our final setup, we need to start the Morrigan questline and go all the way until Act 3. You can start the questline here. Do not kill the NPC at the start of the quest in Act 1. Just go along with whatever the lady tells you. In Act 2, our main set is Percival. It's from one of the main bosses of Act 2. And you can kill this boss immediately. It's in the Corrupted Temple without much story progression. This fight will, however, depend on your level. However, my advice before you do that, get our second sword. This is my setup toward the end of Act 2. We use pretty much the entire Percival set, because if you do not craft, it's extremely good. The Mana Shield will give you some extra survivability. Pretty much Mana Shield means that some of your damage that you take is gonna be inflicted on mana. So during downtime it's gonna be fine. However, thing that you need to do first while you reach Act 2, even before you get your Sunfire Sword, is getting those Azure Lichstone. At least one for your Tidepiercer. These will improve radically your mana management and you can finally drop all that useless gear. For back, we use Dual Knight Cape. We don't need mana recovery that much anymore. Stone Warden, it's crafted, part of the Blacksmith questline. We use the Blood Ring because we put those points in status effect. If the enemy is undead, just remove and use something else, maybe a little more mana. Our main ring, the one that we'll never take away, is in this act. right here. So you want to get this one. I will quickly show you the perks because pretty much, as you can imagine, strength, it's the same. We took a couple of points of health. This is dexterity is the same. Spirituality is the same. We expanded in perception. The priority really doesn't matter, to be honest. Like, it's just extra stat. There is nothing that changes radically how the build is played. And then, of course, we got the best offense. For stats, we are preparing ourselves for the gear that we get the next act. So that is why we have this stats allocation. If you have no intention of crafting the gear that I showed you, you don't need 11 points spirituality for this build to work. So you can just move points elsewhere. And then pretty much the same stats, a little buffed, 3 points required. From now to the end of the game, the rest is gonna be moved toward perception because our critical chance rate is still quite low, but that is fairly normal. If you didn't do that yet, start to upgrade your weapons because that's where most of your damage comes from. It's up to you what you want to do. However, I will still keep the upgrades on a similar level just because the more upgrades you do, the higher the cost becomes. This build is super strong and you will have no trouble in Act 3. If you're below level 40 at the end of Act 2 and you're playing Veteran, I suggest you to go back and do some quests that you missed, because some upgrades and investment is gonna be required to take down the 4-dweller. The goal is for you to switch to the crafted setup that I have. Most items can be gotten easily from that set, so just roam around, kill stuff and you will get it. It's good because you can get a lot of XP by farming mobs in Act 3. And plus there are still quests and bits of loot hidden. The goal of this build is to kill the enemy as fast as possible because we are not that tanky, thanks to the points in self-healing from the critical strike. When your critical strike is very high, you have a very good sustain. However, we are not immortal by any stretch of the imagination. In my Act 3 footage, you can see that I have both weapons upgraded to +9. Thank you for watching. Have fun playing Tainted Grail, and if you enjoyed this video, leave a like and subscribe. Have a good day. See you.